So this VOD review is sort of like a part 2 on like the macro fundamentals of mid fights. I really wanted to go more in detail into ebb and flow and like triggers in this VOD. So I'll give like a lot of examples of like ebb and flow. I'll explain about like distance and how distance is valid. I'll talk maybe a little bit about kiting. And I'll talk about a lot and hopefully you guys will like understand it through like visual stuff. Okay, so the first thing, right, we're looking at ebb and flow. I actually remembered this time. Ebb and flow. Okay. So what is ebb and flow? Ebb and flow, if you actually like Google it, it's sort of like it's like push and pull, right? So here, let me actually like just Google it for you guys. Let's see here, ebb and flow. So this Google definition is a recurrent or rhythmic pattern of coming and going or decline in growth, right? So a way I look at ebb and flow, and I sort of think about it, is like two fists, right? If this is one team and this is another team, right? Team 1 pushes into team 2, team 2 will sort of back up, right? Because they're pushing in hard maybe, and then team 2 will back up, and then team 2 will then push back in, and then team 1 will back, and it's this constant sort of like push and pull sort of aspect. Okay. So I'll give you an example in a little bit, but what I'm going to sort of define is like how to like sort of look at it. So when you think of ebb and flow, right, it's sort of like the flow of a fight. Okay, when you think of that in more detail, you sort of look at what a pull is. What a pull is, what a push is, and what I'd also call is matching, which is sort of specific. So pulling is sort of like you are sort of like kiting the enemy's push. Pushing is you're sort of just like you're literally just pushing into the enemy team. And then matching is you're sort of like you're both pushing to each other at the same time. Like you're both sort of like push each other. You both push into each other. So I'll describe it again with the fists, okay? So this is team 1, this is team 2, okay? If team 1 decides to push, right, which is the second one, push into the enemy team, right, they're pushing. So they're pushing into team 2. Now, team 2 then can pull. So as soon as team 1 pushes in, team 2 can back up, right? And that's pulling, okay? Now, matching is when team 1 and team 2 both hit each other at the same time. They push into each other at the same time, okay? Now, at a very high level, hopefully this sort of makes sense, right? Like there's the push, you're pushing into someone else, you're kiting, and you're matching. And for people who played GOATs, I'm sort of going to use this as like a very straight like analogy that some people get right away, right? If you ever played GOATs, GOATs ebb and flow is super big in GOATs. It was obvious. Like if your team didn't play ebb and flow well, you were just a bad GOATs team. And a simple way to like look at it, right, is if an enemy team is rallying at you, right, and like you can even look at a brawl comp. If an enemy team is like rallying at you, okay, and you have rally, as a team who has rally and like the enemy team is rallying at, right? So I'm just gonna draw it out for you guys. So team 1, and then we'll use a different color for team 2. Team 2, okay. Team 1, right, has rally, and they're rallying, okay. They're rallying into team 2. Team 2 has rally, okay. They are not using it, but they have it, right? So what'll happen here is team 1 will be like, okay, like we're gonna push into them, we're gonna push into them, we're gonna push into them, which is a push, right? And then team 2 will say, they're pushing. Okay, we have rally, but I don't really want to rally yet. I want to sort of like try and back up. I want to try and back up and like kite that, right? Which is a pull. Again, they'll try and back up, right? Make the team's 1's rally like end and not get that much value. And then right when team 1 is closer, a little bit higher level, a little bit closer to team 2, right? Then what team 2 will do, right? Maybe they only backed up to here, is they'll push back now. So now they'll push and they'll push with rally. Okay, so it's sort of this concept of one per team's pushing, right? One team's backing up, then he's pushing back with the rally. And in GOATs, this was like it happened a lot. You'd see like an enemy team push with rally, the enemy team would be like, we have rally, but we're not going to use it yet. We're just going to back up, right? The enemy team gets closer, then they rally back into them. Okay, so before, hopefully if you watched a lot of my other videos, I talked about something called triggers. And if you watch my macro fundamentals videos, I talked about something called dynamic comps. Okay, so dynamic comms are essentially like what helps triggers. What helps you get triggers. Triggers is nothing but like advantages and disadvantages in a fight. For example, let's say two teams are fighting, okay? It just brawl v brawl, both teams have honor or whatnot. One team like decides to nano the Ryan, right? You nano the Ryan, you're gonna push with that. That's a trigger, right? Like I have nano, I can nano you, Ryan. That's a trigger for the Ryan to push forward and like go upwards, like to go forward and like like engage in the enemy team, right? You can also say it the other way. If the enemy team, oh, their Ryan's like getting nanoed, right? It's a trigger for us to like back up, like like let's back up, let's kite that nano Ryan, right? So essentially, it's basically just like it's small information that you see or can be said, right, to sort of again like lead your team in sort of this action to sort of push forward or to kite. So, and that's why I said before, right, if you watch the dynamic comms video, right, that's exactly what dynamic comms are. Dynamic comms is nothing but information that leads to some type of action, right? Where it's like, they have barrage, get ready to like, deal with it, or like, or we have beat, can we push with beat, right? That's immediately a trigger, okay? And like, she's like, I'm gonna beat, right? We beat, we push forward, right? So, dynamic comms and triggers are very closely like intertwined. Let me sort of draw out a situation so you can sort of see like what I like to call like an ebb and flow map is what I call it, and hopefully it'll sort of make sense. Okay. So let's say we've got, Ryan, let's say Diva, I'll just go little Brawly, Kree, and then Lucio, Ana. Okay, so both teams are running this comp. It's a mirror, making it very, very simple. Okay, now team one, okay, has in terms of alts, right? They have, let's say they have Nano, they have Beat, and then they maybe have, let's say they have May alts. Okay, team two has again Nano, Beat, and then maybe McCree alt instead. Okay, so let's say team one, right, says, you know what, we want to go first. We want to, push into the enemy team, right? We want to push. We want to go first. So then team one says, okay, we want to push, right? So they do the arrow, right? They look to push into the enemy team, and they maybe push with nano. Team two says, oh man, okay, they're nanoing us. They're like, they're pushing with nano. We need to instantly kite. So they will back up, right? And they'll essentially kite here, right? And I'll make it also clear here. This is a push, right? This is a pull. And then team two will be like, okay, we're gonna pull, we're gonna kite, right? And I'll even write kite here as a start, so hopefully it makes sense. Then they're gonna push back in. They're gonna be like, you know what? Okay, like we've kited a lot of this nano. Now it's time for us to push back with our nano. So then team two will be like, okay, now we're gonna push now with their nano. Then team one will be like, oh man, okay, they're pushing with their nano. Ooh, I really don't want to deal with that. I really want to kite their nano, right? So now team one will then back up, right? Which will be again a pull, or sort of. Wait, let's put this a little bit lower. Oh, whoops, cancel. No, don't. Okay, I thought I was going to delete it for a second. I was going to be really sad. Then team two. And by the way, like if you notice, I'll sort of do it here. Well, as this is going down, that's a time factor. It's a time factor. So as like this is the first thing, second thing, third thing, right? So now team one will look to kite. They'll look to pull, which is kiting, right? And then they'll be like, okay, cool. Like now nanos are both gone, right? So we can say this is gone. This is gone. Now team one will be like, okay, cool. Like we kited this. Now let's look maybe to beat engage. So now they'll say, you know what? We're gonna push back in with them. We're gonna push back on the enemy team, and we're gonna push with a beat. The enemy team, as you can probably guess, what's gonna happen? They're gonna kite that. Whoops, a little bit lower. They're gonna kite that or pull, right? Then they're gonna push back with their own beat, right? And then then the enemy team will be like, oh man, now we gotta kite their beat, right? So the enemy team will kite, right, with beat, the team two's beat. So a kite, which is again a pull, Then they'll push back in with maybe, this time, maybe a Mail. This is like their last ultimate, right? So they're going to push with a Mail. And this is a push. Whoops, I didn't draw this well. They'll push with Mail. That's a push, right? And then blue team will now kite out, right? And they'll look to push, but they've got Creole, so maybe they'll do a matching thing here, where the Mail happens, and they'll say, you know what, we don't want to kite, we're just gonna match. So they'll match, and maybe they'll make Creole here to hopefully stop the enemy team from pushing their Mail, right? And this is like a match. So like now you're sort of seeing, right, like there's this concept of like, one team's pushing with Nano, team's kiting back, the other team's pushing in, right? It's this constant, like, it's like push back and forth, push back and forth, it's this constant back and forth action, right? And sometimes you match. Now the biggest thing I want you to understand, right, is that this obviously works in an essence of like sort of pushing and pulling, but there's a big like if or something that's sort of happening here. And that's to assume that in this whole period, right, like this whole time here, that like nobody dies, right? Literally off this first thing, like team 1 here could get like 2 kills maybe. They could get 2 kills, right? And that'd be huge, right? And I'm not gonna go too much into trading. I'll talk about it a little bit later, right? But like if the 2 kills happens, then team 2 might say, you know what, that fight's over. Or they might say, you know what, we're still going to nano our Reinhardt because we can push with our nanoed Reinhardt and then try and get like a trade and like kill 2 people on the enemy team, right? So because normally they're close together, and I'll talk about distance in a second. But what I'm getting at is at a very, very high level, and I'll show you a cool thing from GOATS, and even like not even GOATS, like literally Team CC's match versus Korea's dark mode team that just happened, right, in a second, where a lot of ults are happening and nobody's dying. Because they actually, like, as a very high level, if you understand how to position and use your CDs well, you can still live, right? And you can sort of expect it, like, oh, they have nano, okay, they're going to nano Ryan engage. We need to make sure, I save speed boost maybe to kite out, right? So you can sort of understand what's going on. Okay, so this is sort of like an ebb and flow diagram, or what we like to call it. Hopefully this makes sense. The next thing I want to talk about, okay, and I'm going to actually use a video now to sort of hopefully explain this, is, this is an example of ebb and flow with ultimates, right? If you can imagine, ebb and flow doesn't, like, the triggers, right? Like, here are, like, ults, right? But triggers don't just have to be ults. They can be CDs. For example, if you get, like, if your team gets a 5-man anti on the enemy team is probably going to kite, right? And you can probably push forward, right? So, or maybe your team gets an insane Maywall, on the enemy team, and you're obviously going to push into the enemy team is probably going to try and kite, right? Or maybe match with their own Maywall. Right, so it can be CDs too. So I'm going to show you a video from a long time ago. I'm sorry if the quality is not the best. That's what I was using on my laptop. But it's from an OWL match, and it, in my opinion, explains ebb and flow sort of pretty well. And I sort of talk about like the different conditions and stuff. Okay, so in this video, you'll see Defiant versus Fusion. You'll see the arrows and sort of see what's happening. So hopefully to watch this, and this should make sense. Okay, right over here, Coco goes up. Ryan drops. Okay, right over here, right? Now you're gonna see, right, roughly over here, Alarm will eventually get a nade, right? So now that nade is now go time, right? That's a trigger. Now Fusion has a trigger to push back in, right? And now Defiant want to try and back up. They want to try and live, right? So now you'll see Fusion, the pink, push really hard, right? They're pushing really hard. You see the nano. Immediately Defiant wants to push back in, right? So now Defiant now will try and push back in with the beat and shatter. That's them pushing back in with beat and shatter. Now, see the quality. It is 10. Okay, cool. There's beat over here, in which now Fusion wants to try and live and wants to keep going. So now that's them beating to try and contain, but also at the same time also trying to push back in, right? And then you see them high noon too at the same time. So there's like 2 things with that last arrow, and they end up winning. Okay. So hopefully that made sense. Again, it was a really, really old video clip, but again, I'm a visual person, and like this can make sense, right? But like in my opinion, without actually seeing this, right, you're sort of going to struggle to understand it. So hopefully that helped a little bit more. I'm going to give another example from Korea right now. Actually, let me pull it up. of just another ebb and flow fight. Let's see here. Let me pull it up. Okay, so this fight right here, I'm not gonna play the sound because I think there's gonna be a bunch of casting. So if you go look into this fight here, you have red team or team CC, right? Everyone knows team CC, like absolutely bonkers, really crazy. They moved to KR. They're playing 6-man, right? And I'm not gonna go too much into 6-man, but the biggest thing I think people don't understand too much about 6-man is the fact that everyone on your team is mobile. And I'll talk about why that's important in a little bit later, but everyone is mobile, right? And on this team, you've got the Ryan Zari who isn't mobile. And yeah, so let's sort of see what happens here, right? Because you can see Team CC, like they've got EMP, they got Pulse, they have Cole, right? You can see, you know, White Mode has, you know, EMP as well, right? So Team CC could just technically just EMP first Cole and maybe kill them, right? But like if White Mode lives that, right, then they can push back in. So it's sort of watch and see what happens. Okay, actually, I'm going to use the sound. Hopefully it's not too bad. Oh, wow, my ears. Okay, so over here, right? So Lubu looks for the EMP here. So this is a push. This is the push, right? Team TC is pushing in to White Mode. White Mode has to live right now, right? They have to kite. They have to quote-unquote pull, right? So this is them pushing. Right? And again, in this situation, right, they pushed, but guess what happened? Somehow Tracer died, right? That can happen. Something can go wrong, right? You can still lose someone in your push, right? Now they're even. And now what's happening, right? Now Team CC is kiting. They are pulling. Why? Because they don't have CDs. They used everything to push in, right? Now they have to kite, right? And it's White Mode, or well, Dark Mode now. Dark Mode's turn to push in, right? And you'll probably see them use Cole here, right? So this is now White Mode pushing with Cole. And now if you notice here, again, Team CC, because they have mobility, I'll talk about this later, will easily be able to kite this. Okay, so now if you notice this, Jazz jumps in. Why? Because he has primal. So even though, you know, White Mode's pushing in and going really hard, right? What's going to happen is Jazz is going to start primaling the backline, and I'll explain this concept in a second. So they're pushing in, right? Jazz is behind. Fuyao looks for a Diva Bomb to keep going, or maybe he needs to demech. He got demeched. We can like look quickly and see what happened. No, Pete does it to keep going, or some other reason. Diva Bomb. And what you see, Jazz now is primaling. Literally, like White Mode. White Mode literally pushed in. Let me get Epic Pen. And I'll draw out the diagram, so hopefully it'll help a little bit. White Mode, essentially, so how this worked, right, is Team CC, I'll do it this way, Team CC pushed into them, right, then what ended up happening, so that's number one, I'll say they pushed in, then, you know, White Mode kited as like 1, then White Mode decided to push back in with their Cole, right, which is 2, Team CC then kited, right, as their 2, but during this too, okay, what Team CC did is what I like to call like split focus. Split like focus, like ebb and flow, or like also like pinching in essence. It's sort of pinching, but not fully, right? What they decided to do is, you know what? We're gonna send a Winston behind, you know, your team. Like this Winston's a really bad color. Sorry, let's use maybe white. Maybe white would be better. Yeah, so they decided to send a Winston behind, okay? And essentially what they're doing now is they're having the Winston go behind Team C, behind like the yellow team, which is White Mode, and pressure them. So when White Mode is pushing forward, that push becomes really hard, right? And what ends up happening is White Mode now, instead of this, right? What has to happen is some people are going forward, but some people have to turn for this Winston. So now their push gets split, which then, in theory, right, when, you know, this push ends up dying, this will then allow Team CC to push back in hard, right? And then it'll be very hard for White Mode, because now they're split, for them to be able to kite later, okay? This concept can also, you can sort of imagine this concept, by the way, with a Reaper. Like imagine, for instance, right, in this situation, like I'll erase all of this right over here, right? If White Mode, when they pushed back in, Team CC, you know, had a Reaper, and Team CC backed up all the way, right? And then Team CC's Reaper maybe teleported behind here. Again, I'm using just black. Team CC, you know, it's Reaper's teleport behind here, and they started pressuring like their backline. That would again force white mode when they're trying to like W key into Team CC when they're kiting to split. People would have to turn for that Reaper, right? And some people would still go forward, and that'll force, right, there to be a split focus. Okay. Yeah, so now you'll see like he's primaling, right? He's trying to mess up their push, right? He manages to get one, right? And then on top of this, right, like they know they have EMPs, so they're trying to special pressure Spera. If you saw earlier, they're actually hacked Spera, right? Now they got one, right? The Lucio manages to get the Diva. Lucio gets another one, right? And in the end, actually, you know, white mode ends up winning, right? So in the end of an ebb and flow, someone's gonna win, right? Whether you went first or you went second, right? Someone's gonna win. And that's what makes ebb and flow interesting, right? And if you're going first, right, then you need to try and get value early or get value at the very end of the fight, because you know the way to look at it in a very basic essence, right? At this concept, if you're going first versus going second, if you're going first, you're literally putting everything to trying to kill the enemy team. So the enemy team is trying to kite, right? And if you're going second, right, you're looking to try and kill them in this mid fight type, you know, this mid area here. Now, when you're going first, right, eventually you'll get your CDs back later, and I'll show you an example in alt cycling, right, later, and that's when you push back in and the enemy team doesn't have CDs. So normally when you're going first, you want to get value, like you want to try and get value like right away, like right away, or you want to get it like late fight. And if you're going second, you normally want to get it in the mid fight. However, this is not always the case. Sometimes it can be, you know, other stuff can happen. All right, so now, this is obviously a very long conversation. I didn't really expect this video to go this long, but let's keep going, okay? So hopefully the concept of ebb and flow should make sense. This concept of sort of like, you know, push and pull, right? How sort of alts work and how, you know, a nade can take into part, or like a sleep, or, you know, a May wall, anything like that, how it sort of like puts into this concept of, you know, pushing into enemy team and kiting. Okay, now the next concept that I don't think actually many people understand is this concept of distance. And this is what I think a lot of teams struggle with, right? Is this concept of distance and ebb and flow. Whoops. So the biggest thing you got to realize is why distance is important is because if you get close to the enemy team, right? And let me sort of just give you an example. Let's see here. I'm going to use, I'll use this for an instance. Whoops. So let's use this. So for instance, well, we're not going to look at that example right now. If you get close to the enemy team when you're going first, right? So let's say like one team is, you know, over here and the enemy team is over here, okay? If you're this close, right, between the teams, there's this much distance, right? Barely anything. And you decide to go first with like a Nano Reinhardt, right? The enemy team won't be able to kite. You're so close to the enemy team that it's not feasible for the enemy team to be able to back up and kite properly in time. So what'll end up happening is you'll end up just pitting them, right? And so what'll happen is the red team won't be able to kite, and we know kiting is pulling, right? So this concept of kiting back here, this pull, won't exist anymore. So what red team will be forced to do now is they'll be forced to match, right? So if the blue team here pushes, right, with like a Nano Ryan, or Nano and Reinhardt, red team will have to do something of equivalence. Maybe it's a beat, maybe it's a Nano Ryan, maybe they'll have to lamp to live, right? They'll have to do something so they can still hold their place. Because if they kite, right, what's going to end up happening is they're just kiting in open space. The enemy team's going to run into them, and they're going to like start taking damage while they're, you know, in open space, and they're probably going to die. Okay? So it's really, 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 really important that you understand this concept of distance. If you know the enemy team is going to go really aggressive, right, and they start closing distance, you should start thinking, oh man, okay, like they're getting really close here. Am I going to be able to kite if they do something? If you know, right, that like you can match, then you can hold your space. If you know you can't match, right, then you got to think about maybe you start kiting early, try to maintain distance, maybe look for some type, like have your DPS maybe flank. I'm not going to go too much into that, but like you could, like, there's a bunch of other possibilities you could do. Okay, so this concept of distance. Let's see here. Now, when we talk about distance, a few more interesting things pop up. So now hopefully you should understand why, if the team who's going first is really smart, what they'll try and do is they'll try and close distance. They'll try and get really, really, really close to team 2 and then engage. right? That's a team who's playing first is they're smart, because what they'll do is they'll get really close to the enemy team, and then they'll speed from them being close into the enemy team, and it'll make it very hard for the enemy team to be able to kite, right? And then that's just if there's close distance. If there's long distance, right? Let's say now, for example, let's go back here. Let's say, for instance, and this is a bad example of going first. Team 1, right? I'm just going to put them over here, is over here, and team 2 is over here. Well, now let's say team 1 says, you know what? We're going to push you all the way from here. So the distance is like this. And they say, you know what? Like we're going to nano our Reinhardt and we're going to press W. So they decide from this distance, they're going to push in. Well, there's so much distance, and distance is equivalent to time, right? It takes time to cross a distance. Since there's so much distance here, that means there's going to be a lot of time for team 2 to be able to react. So team 2 now, because of the distance here, will have time to actually back up and like kite, right? Which is a pull. Oh, whoops. Oh no, I lost it. Let me try and get it back again. It's a very old scrim. Hopefully Matt and Sklee won't mind. So we're here again. I'll just do it again really fast. Team 1, team 2, right? There's this massive distance. If team 1 pushes, like there's going to be a massive distance, so it's a lot of time. Because a lot of time, team 2 will be able to kite and pull. And then what will end up happening, right, is team 1 maybe will end up here. Then team 2 will be able to push back in now at some point, right, whenever they want to. And maybe team 1 is like really close to team 2, so that'll make it easier for team 2 to hit them, right? So at a higher level, if you think about this, and I'll explain this really fast. If you know that, so team 1, team 2, right? If team 1 pushes, right, team 2, and maybe they stop like right around here, team 2 kites like just right over here now, right? So the distance between the first thing, that's the first engage, right? And now the second engage is just is this now, right? So you can sort of say now is, wow, right? You know, like, okay, team 1 closed so much distance, right? Team 2 only kited a little bit, and team 1 is now closer, right? So now when team 2 wants to push back into team 1, it's going to be a lot easier because they're closer, and it'll be harder for team 1 to kite. So sometimes, you know, if you know there's going to be an ebb and flow happening, sometimes, you know, again, if they're going first, this team should try and get as close as possible to team 2, so team 2 isn't able to kite. Or if they're not able to do that, they'll maybe use an ultimate and do this type of play, but they won't go as far. What they'll do is they'll like maybe play this corner and just like try and maintain distance, so that if that team 2 does push back in, right, they're able to kite again if needed. So this just sort of explain like this concept of distance being close and far. Now, next level. And I know this is a lot. Hopefully this makes sense. It's definitely a lot. So the next part, right, is the concept of like mobility. So when you think of distance, right, if your team has mobility, right, like you have a Winston that can jump, things get more interesting because you can close distance faster. Or if you have like a Lucio, right, then you can speed, right, and that also makes it, you know, more interesting because you can, you know, close distance faster as well. So now the way to look at this, and I'm going to keep it very, you know, short because I think you can sort of probably picture this in your head, right, is look like understand it this way. And you can sort of like, yeah, let's look at it this way. So, does your team have a Lucio? Is the only person who can actually do speed right now. I guess you can maybe say Sim, but we're not really going to count that. Or mobility. And then you can ask the next question is, does their team? Right? So, and now if you just ask this question, right, you're like, okay, you know, for this answer, we have a Lucio, right, as a check. They don't have a Lucio, and, you know, like they have no Lucio, which means you can close distance better. So it's going to be harder for them to kite, right? So you can hit them first really hard. Let's say they have a Lucio, you don't have a Lucio. Well, that gets interesting. I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so you can also think about mobility as well. You have mobility, they don't have mobility. Well, you can, hit them first, right? Or like an example that we sort of saw in here, right? When we were looking at this with 6-man, if this team doesn't have a lot of mobility, right? Like their Ryan Zari doesn't, right? This whole team has speed plus mobility. Everyone on this team does. So when this team pushes into team CC, right? These guys, like, they can use speed to back up, but they can also they don't even need to use speed. They can just jump out, right? And then they can maybe push back in with speed. So they can use a CD to kite an ultimate, which is like a very interesting concept. Okay. I do have some tea. Okay, so let me just run through like 1 or 2 quick examples and like thought process for like the logic, and hopefully that'll like help. So if they have a Lucio, and they're gonna go first, and yikes, and they will go first, right? So they have a Lucio, right, and they're gonna go first. Then how are you gonna deal with this, right? And in this situation, you don't have one. So you don't have a Lucio. So you either need to match their aggression. So right, if they Nano Ryan and speed into you, you either need to like do something to match that. Maybe Nano Ryan, maybe beat. You could lamp and try and live. You could try and Maywall them, right? You could maybe get a lucky sleep. You could at a really high level, you could look to bait your core. Look to bait core. And then like have the rest of your team like take angles. Take angles and try and pinch, not really pinch them, but like how to explain this? Yeah, like take angles and sort of get value from those angles. And this angles is basically just flanking. At a very high level, I call this webbing. For instance, it looks like this. If one team is pushing into an enemy team, your tanks maybe stay here, but then what ends up happening is your DPS sort of like one DPS will go there, another DPS will go like over here, right? And then you sort of like end up like maybe someone goes even further, like even behind, right? I don't know. Like we could have another DPS go here, and we could have just an off tank go here, right? And then you sort of like are all around them, and it sort of creates this web. You could look to essentially play high ground, right? And make it hard for them to push you, because if you're high ground, they have to get to high ground. So you could like play high ground. So that's sort of like one way of dealing with it, right? If they have, Lucio and you don't have it. If let's say the enemy team has mobile heroes now, whoops. So if they have mobile heroes, and looking at my Spark nukes here, you basically want to look to trying to explain it at a very high level. You want to look to try and bait. You want to either look to bait their mobile CD early, so then you can punish them. Whoops. Or you want to look to just pressure them a lot, right? To kill them, right? And if you think about it a little bit better, if you pressure them, it'll either force their CD to force them out, or it'll kill them. So you want to look to pressure the people that are mobile that you think are gonna go on you, or pressure you. And a very simple example is double bubble, where Winston will sort of walk up to you or drop from high ground, and then sort of just stay there and get Zari bubble, and then use his own bubble and sort of just hold space and be really, really oppressive. If you pressure the Winston out really early, the Winston's forced to jump out, then you can take space. Oh, let's see if I'm missing anything really important here. The other thing that's really important too is if you jump, like let's say you look to like engage, right? Go first on like a Winston, right? Like you see, oh, there's a Winston on point, right? And you just like start running at him, like your team starts pushing him. That's really bad. Why? Because the Winston could just jump away, and then your team's in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, what do we go on next? So if you're gonna go on a mobile, thing, then you need to make sure they have no CDs. There's a very big difference between pressuring somebody, right? That's not engaging. It's pressuring, like poking and whatnot, and actually hard engaging. Okay, those are two very different things. So I hope that's that makes sense. You could also, again, like I said, baiting, right? Where you could sort of bait them by giving like maybe a really juicy backline, like maybe like bait an Ana and be like, this Ana looks really nice, right? So the Winston looks to jump the Ana, but then there's a Brig there and a Kree there, and all of a sudden, the Winston just dies. So let me give you an example of distance, okay, from this match. And I think it'll be very helpful. Okay, so this next fight here, right? And as you're seeing, if you literally watch like any top Korean match, or honestly any owl, you'll start noticing ebb and flow. Hopefully, that's like the point of this video, is to like hopefully just start like understanding what ebb and flow is, and hopefully like how distance sort of like plays into effect. Okay, so this next fight, dark mode, white mode, I'm gonna call them white mode, right? White mode's got grab, they've got EMP, they've got Reaper ult, they've got beat, right? Team CC's only got beat, so it's like pretty rough for Team CC if you just think about it. They've only got one ultimate. So let's sort of watch what happens. So white mode sort of backing up, giving a little bit of space. Lubu comes in here, starts farming EMP, just poking. Now here, so Spare decides to EMP first, right? What I want to point out is as soon as this EMP happens, right? The people who get EMP'd is the Winston, the Sombra, and the Tracer. The Winston is able to jump out, right? So he jumps out. The D.Va is able to DM and live, right? I believe that's Lastro, I'm not fully sure. He's able to fade out. They then have beat, right? And whenever the EMP happens, right? Like that means that these guys are pushing forward, right? And these guys being white mode, right? And dark mode, Team CC is looking to kite. But because the distance here is so low, what you're going to actually end up seeing happening is this ends up messing with this ends up like screwing over white mode, because they're not able to get value instantly off this EMP, and Team CC ends up pushing into them and killing them. So you'll see right here. So here, right? And now you see them pushing right back in instantly with beat. And now white mode's like, what do we do? Like they're really close to us. We like, what do we do now? Like we need a kite. Like we need to do something. And white mode could be like, okay, maybe we could grab. Maybe we could, maybe we could Reaper ult. We could beat, because they can't really kite anymore. Like it's not possible to kite. They probably use speed to push in, right? So now they're forced to match, right? But the question is that going to be enough? And then they use EMP first here, right? Or well, they use EMP now second, I guess, and they get a kill off that. There, Lucio beats, but it's a bit too late. They've already got a kill, right? Stuff can happen, in the ebb and flow diagram in the middle. Stuff can happen. People can die. Notice there's still, grab here. Arhong got hacked, right? Winston got hacked. Pressures the Moira. He messes up, right? There's the grab to try and punish Jazz, but they don't have enough damage, because earlier on, if you actually see who they killed here, which is really interesting, is they killed the Reaper. And this comp without our Reaper, right, it lacks a lot of damage. It's like Zarya and Reaper, that's the main damage, right? So now even though the grab's there, right, there's a bubble and there's like a Moira healing, it's hard to kill, and the Sombro's out as well. Then there's a boop, right? And now Jazz is primaling, pushing back in, right? So you can again see this EMP sort, like, or this ebb and flow sort of thing happening, right? The push and pull, right? But it's interesting here because the distance is so close that Team CC was able to live that first engage and actually get really good value in the mid fight. Okay. Where? No, that's not what I want. 1 second. Where did something go? Nope. There we go. Okay. So that's sort of like the distance example. I'm gonna show you really fast a special type of ebb and flow that was really popular in GOATs called an alt cycle. This was sort of, I know the quality's bad, I'm sorry. This is what I had only on my laptop. I didn't even have a PC. But what sort of happened at the start of this, right, is at the very start of this fight, Revival, right? It's Revival versus Second Wind and Goats a long time ago. But Revival actually pushed out of that door over there with Rally and took space with Rally. And then after that, right after that happened, they grabbed first, right? They're at 0%. Desires grabbed second, right? You can see that, the trance is happening and the bomb's happening, but like we're sort of going to watch this. What I want you to look at is sort of like, again, the push and pull, and you're actually going to notice something, what I like to call an alt cycle. And an alt cycle is actually when both teams use all their ultimates, and then you actually build an ult back up again. And this doesn't really happen that much anymore, unless like it's a really, really, really high level play in current metas, or you're playing something that allows you to like sustain a lot. Like Goats allowed you to sustain a lot because you had Brig, Lucio, Zen, right? And then you had tanks, and tanks don't die very easily, right? So there's a lot of sustain. Okay, so we can watch this.
Grab, right? Here's the peel bomb. They don't get it. It's a weirdly placed peel bomb. Beat happens. Diva.
There's a push.
Halo Souls is ult. Just look at the grab difference. Ulpai's already at 51. Azire's only at 6. They need to survive here. They need to go for an ult cycle. Dude, he just farmed so much there. This is theirs. This is 100% theirs. This better be theirs. This better be theirs. There's the grab. Oh, they're so low. The Ryan's so low. They got it. Nice ult cycle, dude. Nice ult.
So again, very old me, but I think it's like 2 or 3, like 2 years old maybe. I don't know, quite a while. But yeah, so like you can sort of see like again like the push and pull there, where like literally like they actually rotated through 12 ultimates, and they ended up winning Revival because Apply, I think it was Apply, right? Yeah, Apply built a grab again, right? And then they ended up killing with that, winning that. So that's a very special situation called an alt cycle in Ebb and Flows. Okay, so I want to talk about like 2 other topics, and then we'll sort of be done. Again, apologies, this really wasn't supposed to be this long, but Ebb and Flow and like triggers is like a really long topic and really in-depth and really complicated, I'd say, at a really high level, but trying to make it as basic as possible. So someone asked me like, how do you practice Ebb and Flow? Like how do you like get into this like constant rhythm of like, oh, we need to push in, oh, we need a kite, we need to push in, we need a kite, like, like how do you get into that, right? And in all honesty, it takes a little bit of time. But one thing, I talked to actually a teacher of music, and in music and in teaching, they call this repetition. In esports, I know Zenith, the head coach at TI, used to do it a lot, and I know for a fact a lot of ALWA coaches used to do it too, and I do it here and there. But it's actually like I sometimes force tempo on a team. So like what I mean by that is, as a coach, if my team's fine with it, obviously, and they don't get like annoyed or like they're able to still concentrate. If there's like a fight happening, right, and the goal of the scrim is to maybe like practice on ebb and flow and push and pull, I will basically tell them when to push and when to kite, so that as a team they know to trust me, because I'm seeing everything. I can see when it's going to happen, right? Like if the enemy Ryan nanos, I'll be like put like kite, and then I'll be like like use beat, push, right? And then like excuse me, I'll essentially like get them into this rhythm of like pushing and pulling, which hopefully it'll feel natural, right? And the concept is it's repetition. So I'll do this for like maybe like 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Then I'll let them try it, because hopefully after 30, 40 minutes as a player, you'll sort of get that feeling. You'll sort of like feel, oh, I need to push here. Oh, I need to kite here. Oh, I need to push here. You'll start understanding what it feels like, and then you'll be able to do it yourself. Okay, so that's one way, sort of having like a coach, right? Sort of like say it for you, or say it in comms, so you know how to get the feeling, and then you're able to sort of try it yourself, right? And if you don't have a coach, right, well, one way you could do it is have someone on your team just call push, like push with beat, right? Kite. And preferably that's normally either the main tank or like the Lucio, because Lucio controls tempo. You can be like, oh, I want to push in, I have speed, right? Or like they're gonna beat kite, right? So your Lucio could easily call it. Someone in your backline or another support could call it. Why? Because your backline like literally sees everything, so they're able to sort of see what's going on forward, right? And they can say like, okay, we need to kite here, we need to kite here. We can push in, we can push in, we can push in, right? So your backline could call it, someone in your backline, or you could have your main tank call it, right? Because your main tank's leading your team, so the leader could be like, I want to push in, I want to push in. Oh, I'm under a lot of pressure on the front. I need to kite. So your main tank can call it too, right? So you could have one person on the team try and do this and like go off that. And another way of practicing this, right, is actually just going into a custom game and just practicing like moving forward together and then like backing up in just different dynamic situations. Okay, so those are like certain ways to practice ebb and flow. I'm sure there's more, but those are the ones I can like think like on top of my head, like straight up. Now I'm not gonna go too much into kiting, but I want to quickly explain one edge case that I think a lot of teams struggle with. Edge case, like a weird situation that like people don't really talk about. So as we said, kiting is pulling, right? It's like when you're backing up. Essentially, right, when you're kiting, it's important that when you're kiting, hopefully, someone on your team says, I want to kite to point, or like here, it's like I want to kite to the back left corner. Like if your team is like, I don't know, like over here, team 2, right? I want to kite back to the back left corner, which if you're in the perspective of facing forward here, so the Ryan can be like, I want to kite back to back left corner, and sure, that'll tell everyone, okay, cool, we know where to kite. But in a more practical setting, right, like sure, like having someone say where to kite is really helpful, but I also think as an individual you should understand the macro of like how to kite from corner to corner, right? Like you say like, oh, we're under pressure here, where are we going to kite? Like, I mean, we could kite there, we could kite here, but what makes the most sense? Well, in all practicality, like this makes them a little more sense. This makes sense, but also this makes sense. I guess it depends what you want to do. This is a little bit more of an edge case because you could kite over here, then push high ground, and then go from there. You could kite over here, but then like you're sort of in a weird situation where it's hard to take space back again, right? Because you're giving a lot of the map. But from here, you can be very, very, very aggressive. So what I'm getting at, right, is you might have these edge cases, right, where there's one like over here. It's a very good actually example of an edge case where you could kite to two different situations, right? You could kite, over here to X1, or you could kite to X2. Another one that's very popular, right? I believe there's a door. I think it's like somewhere over here, right? And let's say your team is playing like, here, I'll just say team T1, right? Well, your team could, your Ryan might say, I want to kite back, right? If they beat, well, your team could kite over, take this as like X1 here, or they could also like kite into here as like X2, right? So they might kite inside an inside area or kite into the open, right? And like in macro wise, I'm not going to go too much into it. There's a very big difference between kiting into an enclosed area or kiting into open space, right? And depending on what they have and what you want to do, sometimes kiting in open space is a lot better because it gives your McCree more value. Sometimes kiting into enclosed space is better because maybe you want to punish people or bait them out of the enemy team's LOS, and then like push them back in. So these are like the edge cases that like you sort of need to be aware of, or a little bit more like aware of, because sometimes this can confuse teams. So that was again a really long review. I didn't really expect it to go that long. Hopefully this should explain like the goal for this, right, is to explain this in very simple words. Understand what ebb and flow is. Understand that there is pushing and understand that there is pulling, right? Then understand that their distance in this pushing and pulling, their distance is in there. It's a variable, right? And in that distance variable, speed is somehow related, right? And there's also like mobility. Okay, and then the other thing, right, is sort of understand, whoops, where's my notes? Other thing to sort of understand is like how triggers sort of play into the push and pull. And yeah, there's like, if you can get that from this, I think that'd be great, right? Obviously there's other stuff too, and it gets more advanced, but yeah. If you have questions, feel free to DM me on Discord. I'll be more than happy to answer. And my Discord should be in the information. But yeah, thank you guys. And sorry again, it was really long.